Sources of radiation that everybody is exposed to comes from either natural or man-made. The natural includes terrestrial radiation. That's radiation that emanates from the Earth itself. It could be from buildings, the water. And then you have cosmic radiation. That's coming from the atmosphere. Then you have the medical radiation, which more people are probably familiar with. They understand that if they go to a hospital to get a chest x-ray, a GI series, perhaps a nuclear medical procedure, radiotherapy, they're going to be exposed to radiation at that point. But the reality is you're getting natural background constantly. From natural background, an individual exposed from terrestrial, cosmic, and radiation that emits from the body. On an annual basis, for somebody living at sea level, the typical background is between 360 and 500 millirem a year, which is equivalent to 3.6 millisieverts and 5 millisieverts. Interestingly enough, there is no such definition of what is safe radiation. That is a determination that each individual has to make for themselves. It's a risk basis. For example, members of the general population working around an area, walking into a hospital, are allowed to pick up 100 millirem in a year. A pregnant female, for instance, is allowed to pick up 500 millirem while she is working around radioactive material or in an X-ray generating facility such as a hospital. A nuclear plant worker or any other occupational worker is allowed to pick up 5,000 millirem in a year. The prevailing winds around a nuclear plant determines where the radioactive materials end up going and what areas of the public they may expose a person to. For example, in Fukushima in Japan, the evacuation zone has been put out 12 to 15 miles. That's not mandatory. There are people still living in that area. We know that there are iodine, cesium, cobalt being currently released to the atmosphere, which means the prevailing winds will take this material to those areas where people live. There's been a lot of press because these scanners are starting to show up throughout the United States airports as well as international airports. And there's been a lot of question of how much exposure an individual is being exposed to by going through this unit. The amount of radiation that is occurring at that time is very small. It would take multiple entries through that unit to even come up with an immeasurable exposure. I would say that the concern of a passenger should be a frequent flyer who continuously is in the air, specifically on international routes, is probably getting a lot more exposure than they would by going through that whole body scanner. There are three fundamental ways to reduce the exposure you have to either an X-ray machine or to radioactive material. It comes down to time, distance, and shielding. The less time you're in an area, your dose is reduced. The distance from the radiation, the dose is reduced. And the shielding, are you able to put some kind of a shield between you and the radiation? For an X-ray machine, it's only during the time that the unit is energized where there is an exposure. If you are in an area where you're not getting a medical X-ray and you know there's an exposure from an X-ray generating machine, then you just need to leave the area. A good example on a dose rate, if you were in an area where there was 20 millirem per hour and you were there for 2 hours, your cumulative dose would then be 40 millirem. Now, internationally, they use the unit of the millisievert. So 20 millirem per hour is 0.2 millisieverts per hour, thus resulting in a cumulative dose of 0.40 millisieverts. Radiation can't be seen, touched, smell, you can't hear it. So the only way an individual would know whether or not they were exposed to radiation is to have a personal dosimeter. For example, radiation exposure is cumulative. Once the body is exposed to radiation, there is a very small amount of repair, but over time, continual exposure is going to accumulate. Again, the person would like to have that information. The situation where an individual is not being monitored by a radiation dosimeter, they would have to rely on the news media or a regulatory agency who is stating that there has been an incident of some type in their area where there may be a radiation exposure, it may be radioactive materials, it could be contamination. If you are wearing a personal dosimeter, it will give the entire family peace of mind for a situation that may arise, such as an incident at a nuclear plant that you may live around, a dirty bomb that could occur in the area that you happen to live in or be working in or driving through, and if a situation such as a transportation accident, perhaps radioactive material is being transported via cargo, via train, via truck. If an incident occurs, you have your dosimeter, you just simply go to a computer that has internet connection, you plug it in, you read it, you know exactly what you were exposed to, and now you do have that peace of mind whether or not there is a situation you need to be concerned with or not. Radiation reports show the exposure a person is receiving on the current time that the badge was worn. It also includes the quarter-to-date dose they received, the year-to-date dose they received, as well as their lifetime dose they received. And the reason for that is because radiation damage is cumulative. The only way a person knows whether or not they may have a biological effect is to know all of those readings, especially the lifetime exposure. Instadose is a technology called direct ion storage. It looks like a simple flash drive. It simply records the amount of radiation exposure the individual is receiving for the entire time they're wearing it. That dose does not go away. As I mentioned, radiation damage is cumulative. This is a cumulative device. The decision as to where you wear a dosimeter is dependent on the direction from where the radiation is coming. For example, an X-ray technician doing a fluoroscopic exam, the radiation is coming from underneath a table that the patient is laying on. So typically the person would take the dosimeter and they would put it on their collar. If a member of the general public wanted to wear a dosimeter, they typically could wear it on a pocket. They could simply put it in a pocket. They could even put it in their purse, briefcase, or backpack because the radiation will penetrate. What makes this the dosimeter of choice is the fact that it is fully accredited in the United States, it's accredited in the United Kingdom and other countries. It is the only device that you need not send back to be processed before you get the dose that you received. You simply wear it, plug it in, get your dose, and never have to worry about sending it back to get your exposure. That is the primary benefit of the instadose dosimeter.